Okay, so I just got my invite to next year's WCQ with my pet deck, Drytron. Specifically, I won the OTS Championship in Hastings, and hence this mat. And I want to use this opportunity to talk about the deck and the logic behind it in general and my choices for this event. Obviously this was about a week ago now, so this was pre-ban list and Rise Heart was legal. And with the knowledge that it is now gone, I wanted to look back more seriously at the deck as a competitive option, both for me and for others. So, for the event itself, it was only 4 rounds, so it's hardly a YCS, but I won every round with a 2-0. Obviously I couldn't play every meta deck in the 4 rounds, but all the decks I faced were, at the very least, meta adjacent. So start by going through the rounds. Round 1 was against Pearly. Game 1 I got double impermed, which kept me off my full combo. However, I had 3 bodies on the board, so I made IP and Mu Beta and set Eclipse. They forced out the IP early, but I just set their cats with the Eclipse, and they can't really do anything. So after that, I take them with Natasha and just OTK with the Boral Sword I make on turn 3. Game 2, they go for Plump rather than through a Pearly Noir, but it didn't matter massively either way because I opened Kurikara, went off. I actually made my biggest misplay of the day here. I missed Lethal because Zeta got Belled, and therefore I didn't have access to Meteonis. I actually forgot that had happened, and therefore didn't grab it off Diviner later. But either way, I still set up a decent board that they couldn't break on the board. I just missed Lethal that turn. Round 2 was against Sword Soul, the good old reliable, I suppose. It's quite a strange match, particularly game 1, because she just made Pep and passed. I asked her why. She said that some decks didn't have a main deck out to it, so that she liked to do that game 1. However, I have Draconids, so I just hit over it, and she couldn't beat through the board. Game 2 was much more normal. She did the standard Chi Shao Baron Blackout line, as well as one set. That was an unknown. Unfortunately for her, I had Lava Golem, so just tribute over both. That turns off the set as well, because obviously Lava Golem's not a worm. And then I pop the back row with Nightmare Phoenix. It was a Floodgate, I can't remember which one. Round 3 was Branded. Game 1 was actually the only time in the whole tournament I pulled off the standard Magician of Black Chaos lock. He still tried to play through it with Branded Lost, Branded Fusion and whatever, but I had Perfection there to negate those. I assume what they're going for was make Titanic Clad and search Mercuria, but obviously they didn't. Game 2, he more or less just bricked, so he just set 3 and normaled an Albaz. I popped one of the sets, it was Branded in red. Then the other one was a Super Poly. I played through that, still OTK'd regardless. Drytron is able to be toolboxy and just not really care about that. And the final match was Kashtira. It obviously the big looming force of the format at the time. And it was pretty straightforward throughout. I actually got shifted both games. Game 1 I went first, Alpha Tribute Delta, they changed shifter. So I'd have to make Kikaganashi Fuko, and then I just used talents, take their unicorn, and they actually just couldn't play through that. They just attacked me with Rice Heart. On follow-up, I'm able to take over the game. Game 2, he doesn't brick, but he can only make Shangri-Era, and then shifters me again. I can't play through it, obviously, because of the shifter, but Fucko buys me another turn. They still aren't unbricked. And eventually I just take over the game in the grind because Drytron can just keep going back with the same resources in a way that Kashtira is good at, but not as good as Drytron is. Both of those kind of demonstrated just how good Drytron is on follow-up, because everything plays out of the graveyard. And even if your opponent can build a board when you make Fucko and pass, there's a fair chance you'll be able to break it anyway. Bear in mind, of course, you do need Tribute Fodder in hand, so, try and keep a Ben 10. Okay, so on to the deck itself. Now that I've talked about the games, so start with the Drytrons themselves. We have Triple Alpha, triple zeta, triple gamma, and triple delta. I like the 3-3-3-3 combination for this. This one searches a ritual monster, searches a ritual spell, summons a second Drytron from grave, and you draw a card by revealing a ritual monster on spell. All of them do this as part of their summon effects, which distributes a ritual or Drytron from hand or field, summon themselves from hand or graveyard. You'll quite often see these two cut to 2. I quite like the consistency of having them a lot, so I tend to keep them higher. The other option, of course, is cutting these 2 and then playing a couple of Prosperities, or ideally 3 Prosperity in there. But Prosperity is quite a lot worse going second, because you want to be able to pitch this for things like Droplet, as well as you want to be able to OTK, which you can through Prosperity, but it's a lot harder. So it's frustrating playing Prosperity sometimes, even if it is a big consistency boost. So I tend to stick to just a lot of pure names. In addition to that, you actually need to play some searches to this, because it is effectively a 2-card combo deck. So you have 3 Emergency, 2 Fafnir, 2 Nova, and a Foolish. All of these effectively get you to, most of the time, Alpha, but really any name, because they can just search them. Fafnir by searching Nova. Though Fafnir can also search Meteonis in a pinch. Overall, that makes it to 20 names in the deck, which means you have an 83% chance to see 2 names when you go first, and a 66% chance to see 3 names going second. And because of that, depending on the deck, you can actually side out 2 names going second. Typically a Delta and a Foolish is what I tend to go for. And you still have an 85% chance of seeing 2. Because why I'm focusing on these numbers, because you generally need to have 2 names in order to combo. If you have a Ben 10 and a certain name, you can sometimes combo, but it's more fragile, and you still just want to have some good extension. You can do that by getting through Beatrice, and then you can send Gamma to bring the first one back. Another thing to worth note about the Drytron names is that Gamma is particularly good going second, because you can just Gamma pitch Zeta, for example, summon them both, and that threatens Zeus on 1 activation, particularly on one that people aren't normally that willing to negate. They normally like to wait for things like Alpha. And the other main question is Fafnir and Nova. This could easily be 3 Nova, 1 Fafnir. It doesn't hugely matter, but technically that plays better into draw. But it effectively never comes up. So then, after the Drytrons, we have all the Light Fairies. We have... If you're wondering why Light Fairies is this whole section that I've gone for, it's because they're all searchable directly off Cyber Angel Ben 10. And you play 3 of them because it is a non-once per turn searcher for all the rest of these as well. You only play 1 other Cyber Angel, and that is Natasha. Natasha is unbelievably broken. A lot of the time, if you're getting Natasha to hit the board, that means you've won. You're going second game plan, quite often just baiting out negates until you can ritual summon Natasha, and then you just take the whole forward and OTK them. The other option for Cyber Angel specifically is normally Edison, but it's not really worth a spot. Then after that you have Herald of Perfection. This is part of your end board because it just negates, protects your main combo. You can't always get to this, but it's obviously very nice when you can. Choju is part of your main setup combo and often used to set up Perfection. These 2 tend to get sided out going second because they don't do that much in favour of more non-engine, but integral to the main combo going first. Diviner, this is your other normal summon in situations where Choju doesn't work, or going second, as well as just helping to unbrick you sometimes. Going second, you can also use it to send things like Untis to just force a piece of interaction, or get rid of a back row that's in the way. But your main combo goes through Choju, but you always want to have the Diviner. Only need 1 because, again, all searchable directly off Ben 10. And then finally, the last one is 1 copy of Herald of Orange Light. I know it's gone to 3, but you really don't need to play 3. If you want to play more as effectively more non-engine, you can if you want, but it's very neg to discard 2 to negate one thing, as well as very inconsistent because it needs another fairy, even though you are playing a lot. Particularly because you don't want to discard things like Ben 10. That said, it's very useful as a searchable one-of, both as a discard to protect your combo at the end, as well as if you open your combo otherwise, you can just search an orange light off Ben 10 to protect you from things like Nib. So, as I've said, Ben 10 searches so much of your deck already, but it can't directly search everything. This stuff, you have to go through an intermediate first. You have Black Chaos Max, which is your deck's main win condition. It's essentially just Azathoth. On summon, you can just tribute a monster you control, normally itself, to play around things like Droplet and Imperm, and they can't activate monster effects with the turn. There's Draconids, which is cuttable, but I tend to like putting it back in. It's just a good out to things a lot of the time because it's big and untargetable. As well as helping you play through Nib by being a machine that you can just tribute for Meteonis. Again, potentially cuttable, but I do like to have it in because it just comes up in a lot of corner cases. 1 Meteonis Drytron and 1 Dawn of the Herald. I am largely of the opinion that you should always be playing 2 ritual spells. Either you play 2 Meteonis, or you play 1 and 1, depending on whether you're on the Perfection package. Obviously this time I am, hence the Dawn of the Herald, but what I don't like is 2 Meteonis, 1 Dawn, because I think it's just not worth the space, because main next phase in Drytron is so much at a premium, even compared to most other decks. That said, if you're on 2, the ability extra follow-up is nice, so if you are off Perfection, just play a second. But I really don't like going to 3. So then finally we have the non-engine. As I said, space in this deck is really tight, and this deck has actually got 8 non-engine slots, which is a lot for Drytron, especially on a 40 card list. I've done that by actually making quite a lot of cuts. So then we have, first of all, 3 Kurikara. I've classed this as non-engine, but it isn't really. If anything, it's an extender, because if your opponent uses any monster on field to negate the summon of your Drytrons, or negate their effects, negate the effect summon, sorry, you can just tribute over this, removes that monster in the future, and gives you level 1 on field anyway. So it is kind of useful to just treat it as an extender. It's also a fairy, which means you can pitch it for orange light of perfection. So much synergy with the deck, because it also can't be normal summoned or set, which means you can use its effect you can on the same turn as the Drytrons. After that we have Book of Eclipse. Now that Arise Heart is gone, this has been replaced with Forbidden Droplet, but in the meantime this is still an extremely strong card. You don't really mind if your end board gets set, because as much as your end board is even on the field, it's largely just links, and if it is a non-link, chances are it's just a Herald of Perfection, which as long as you've resolved the Black Chaos Max lock, it doesn't matter if it's face up or face down. The main reason I played this over Book of Moon, which is obviously a bit better when you go first, is because things like Cornfield Coatl can negate Book of Moon, versus this, it stops all the negates on the Chimera board pretty much straight up. Both good, but dropping out now. And then the last 2 slots are just 2 copies of Talents. Unlike Kurikara and to a lesser extent Eclipse, it's not like Talents has masses of synergy with the deck, other than just being a really good card that helps you combo by drawing more, by getting you link material, etc, etc. Or even just the annoying as hell hand rip, which obviously does come up. And another thing it's good for is if you use Natasha's effect to take, quite a lot of the time they will pop the thing you take so you can't link Natasha back off. You can then response talent to take the other monster and just keep going anyway, so it can help extend as well. that's it for the main deck, because it is a clean 40. So, in the extra, all Drytron lists should, and this one does, start with 2 copies of Mu Beta Fafnir. You never need the third. It just effectively never comes up unless you're on UDF combos, in which case it could be any rank 1, essentially. But it dumps whichever Drytron you're missing. It's a free +1 if you use the rituals underneath it, because it's 2 materials and then you still have the Mu Beta. And the spell trap negate effect actually comes up sometimes in the late game, where you can just pass on this with 1 material and a Draconids, and that's, on low resources, pretty difficult to out most of the time. It's extremely pushed, but it's also the closest the deck has to a singular choke point. So if you can make a negate before you commit to this, normally perfection, you probably should. If you open combo plus Ben 10, that's normally not a problem. Then you have Beatrice, which is the other combo enablers, closest you get to a starter in the extra, I suppose. This one is used in your 1-name hands, because you can use Diviner and Ben 10 to make this, and then you can just send Gamma. That typically weakens your end board, but it does mean that you have an end board now, as opposed to Anima Pass or something like that. I'm not playing them in this build specifically, but you can also do things like dump an Ishizu Shuffler, so negate other graveyard decks, and even shuffle back your own materials. Or you can send Necro Banshee to Zombie World people if they're on flu. It's just incredibly versatile card, limited for a reason, and you can see obviously the case for it being banned. Kikagadashi Fuko is your main Zeus pilot, and it's also your plan B if you get trolled or shifted. It's unaffected by card effects, and if you activate its detach effect, it can't be destroyed by battle either, and you take no damage. So you can just make this, say, okay, I'm going to live a turn. Your opponent, there's a fair chance they'll be able to set up, but you'll have all the follow-up in the world, because so little is... You've lost so little in the meantime. Just annoying to deal with. Then you have Download and Zeus. There's not much to say about this. Zeus is a machine, actually, though, so you can Meteonis tribute Zeus, which is quite funny sometimes. It rarely comes up, but it's just an interaction worth remembering. And then for the links, we have a copy of Anima. This can be a Link Karibo. Whichever you play, you'll find yourself going, I wish I had the other one. But having this to break boards is nice sometimes, even if it is nice being able to pop Link Karibo back and forth. It doesn't matter. Dynamondo. This is what you're aiming to make as part of your end board, because you summon back Magician of Black Chaos Max in your opponent's draw phase, and that effectively wins you the game. You can also, therefore, recycle your Mu Beta Fafnirs and your Bentens with its on-summon effect to put back a ritual monster and a card on the field into the deck, which means you don't run out of materials so quickly, which is another reason you definitely don't need a third Mu Beta Fafnir. Another useful thing you have is it doesn't require effect monsters, just 2 monsters including a ritual. So one way that you can quite often play through Nibiru is if you get nibs and you have Draconids in hand, you can tribute the Draconids in hand, summon Black Chaos Max, and then you go Nib token and Black Chaos Max into this. Another good reason to keep Draconids in the deck, just lets you play through Nib like that. IP Masquerena. This is one of the flex spots. A lot of things that I've considered, but I do like to have it in because it lets you toolbox in places where you get hand trapped a lot, you get interrupted. You can still normally make IP and a guy, and that makes Unicorn, and that's enough. Speaking of nightmares, we have a Phoenix and a Unicorn. Phoenix is generally for popping back road before you really commit to anything. Really simple to make, and also just a link climbing tool because it's a generic link too. Unicorn mostly is just there for Masquerena, but it does come up sometimes on your own turn if you want to get rid of stuff. It's hard to pop it, if you can't pop it or whatever. It's, Unicorn's just a good card. Generic removal. Then we have Link 4's Appaloosa. It seems odd using Appaloosa and Drytron because you very rarely make it on turn 1. And you're already shutting off monster effects anyway, so what's Appaloosa doing? More often than not, what Appaloosa is doing is setting up a negate for things like Nib before you commit to Boral Sword and OTKing them. Speaking of Boral Sword, generally what we're doing turn 2 or turn 3 is trying to OTK with this and a name. Appaloosa protecting it if you've got the materials, otherwise you just go for this. The reason you don't play access code is because a Link 3 plus a Link 1 making access code plus any Drytron is only 7,300 damage, which means it obviously isn't an OTK. This plus a Drytron name is exactly 8k. So you OTK easily with this, and this is just a backup plan, bit of protection. And the main reason you don't need the pops for it is because Natasha will just take their whole board. It's nice and easy. And then after that, you just have the Diviner package. Untest is for popping the opponent's stuff, forcing them to get rid of floodgates or whatever. Arclight is for searching ritual stuff that you need as part of your combos with Diviner. And then finally, at least for this section, you have the side deck. Most important thing for us is probably the Amorphactor Pain, the Imagination Drake Overlord, which is a hell of a name. It's primarily for Pearly and Branded, and there is a good case to main this. In fact, if you look at Yordi Wang at the Madrid Regional, he played this over Chaos Max in the main. And realistically, any two of this Chaos Max and Draconids should probably be in the deck. Which one you tend to choose to main and one you choose to side, matter of choice, matter of local meta. But I sided this because I don't think it offers as much going first. Because if your opponent is on Pearly, they can out this before they really commit, even if that plays into things like draw. But it is extremely good going second, because if you can get this out, suddenly everything is already negated, because negation is a continuous effect. And obviously, I said good against Branded, because it is a D-barrier on legs, and, fusions can't do anything. And because of that, it being a continuous effect, because of it being a continuous effect, it also outs Noir. And because it's continuous, they can't chain Noir to get rid of it and negate that. The really funny time comes when you're playing against Runic, however, because on Ritual Summon this skips the opponent's next main phase 1, and Runic skips the battle phase. So that means they have to go straight from standby phase to end phase. And that's the end of that. You can even do this on your own if you play a small package later, which lets you just fully turn skip with just this and Beatrice, essentially, by skipping the opponent's battle phase for them. Then you have 3 Lava Golem. There's not that much to say about Lava Golem. Tribute removal is good, and you don't really care about your normal. Going second, the only actual normal summonable monster in the deck will probably be Diviner, and if you don't draw Diviner, or even if you do sometimes, just Lava Golem, 2 guys, simple. Bear in mind that you can't play Kaijus and Drytron. You either have to play Kurikara, Sphere Mode, Golem, or Volcanic Queen, because you can only special summon monsters that can't be normal summoned or set. So, this case, 2 monsters, so Lava Golem. A copy of Called By. Normally this card would be in the main, and ideally I'd like it not in the format, because it should be banned. But if it is legal, you've got to at least play it going second. I chose to not have it in the main, for the same reason that I chose to not play copies of Preparation of Rites. I didn't think there'd be that many hand traps going around, and I was largely right. But I also thought they'd be putting them in games 2, game 3 after they saw what I did game 1. Called by the Grave obviously beats things like Droll. It's a hell of a card. 2 Cosmic. I wanted some back row removal, and this is the best one right now. Normally I like Twin Twisters, but with Unchained and Runic running around, you've got to go for Cosmic instead. Only 2, just because of space. There's nothing more than that. Then we have 3 Droplet. This is in the main now, and it is one of the best cards ever for this deck, I think. Posterized Heart, it's obviously way more playable, and that's why I can put it back in the main. And in Drytron specifically, you can frequently just negate whole boards by sending all your names in hand. They can still activate Engrave. You can also send Nova while it's resolving. You can send Fafnir after it's already added. With the possible exception of Runic Live Twin Sprite, I don't know of any other deck that has as much synergy with chucking stuff to Gave as Drytron does. This can and will win you games on the spot, because it also beats Anti-Spell Fragrance, which most other board breakers simply don't. Then we have the section that I come to Thrust and Friends. So, start off, 2 copies of Triple Tactics Thrust. I know it's expensive, and I don't think we've seen staples be this expensive since Droplet, but it is very important. If I had a third, I would be playing it, because you have multiple in-engine targets going second. Foolish if you left it in, Nova, and Cyber Emergency typically. And that's for going second or even first if you get Bestialed. Going second, it's one of, if not the strongest cards in the game. Going second targets I played for it were Herald of the Abyss and Featherduster, as well as, the other extenders. This can just out whatever I want, and this obviously deals with back row. But I don't think there's much point playing things like Dark Ruler more, because they can just negate the thrust instead. Going first, however, we have 1 copy of Harpy's Featherstorm. Now, if the Black Chaos Max wasn't clear enough, stop trying to activate monster effects. They're not going to work. If you get drolled or shifted on your turn going first and you sided thrust in, you can just make Foucault, search this, and pass, and you've got an unbreakable board, and also they're under Azathoth. Given the ridiculous levels of follow-up that Drytron has, that almost always wins you the game. It's honestly a plan B that's better than most decks' plan A. So, that's the list that I played overall, but I don't just want to talk about what I played at the event. I also want to just talk about Drytron in general and what other options there are. Drytron is very toolboxy, so you do have access to a lot of other utility links as well as more or less every ritual ever printed. One of the most common in terms of that is Odd Eyes Gravity Dragon, which it's very tempting because, if nothing else, it's extremely funny. On Special Summon, it's an unrespondable one-sided Giant Trunade, which sounds like it would be insane versus back row decks, and when it works it is, but if they have any kind of removal for the Dynamondo you have to go through to set it up, suddenly you have nothing. And furthermore, going second into those decks, you're probably going to be able to push through it anyway if you're able to set that up. So it just doesn't add enough, consistently enough to really be worth playing. Similarly, you have Magic Key Mech Musket Betos Buster. This was a mainstay in Drytron lists, including my own, for searching Magic Key Unlocking, which is a spell trap negate, and Betos Buster itself is a 2000 attack machine ritual, which is very convenient spells. However, that was back in over the summer of last year, and in Pote format after that. Nowadays, it's just not really worth the space. Even though it's very convenient, it's just setting up one negate, and people aren't really playing things like Dark Ruler like they used to. And even beyond that, this deck doesn't really die to Dark Ruler in the way that it did when you just set up Vanity's Ruler. After that, you haven't just got rituals from that route, you've got ones that you can search with Benten. Editon was the old one that you used to play, particularly when you were just making Herald of Ultimateness. Her ability to recover ritual spells is incredibly useful, which lets you make Beatrice, and Beatrice could obviously send Ava. Editon is nice to have, but I don't think it's really worth playing Editon anymore, because she just doesn't add enough. The other ritual people consider is Cyber Angel Vrash, which reads like a custom card, which, to be fair, so do most of the Cyber Angels, but Vrash in particular. If any of your cards will be destroyed, it's just a negate for that, and it Raigeki's extract monsters on summon as well. But if you think about it in comparison to Ammo Factor Pain, it doesn't matter that much, because if you're summoning this, you're negating all the opponent's extra deck monsters anyway, apart from Lynx, I suppose. And Destruction Protection is such a specific negate in general, so realistically, having this continuous effect going around, making sure you're definitely not going to die even if your push breaks through, and also therefore keeping targets for Natasha to steal, is really useful to have. So Vrash is just sort of behind. Other rituals you have are about, but the typical one that's not played much anymore is Transonic Bird, but that job has more or less been replaced now by Dynamondo. That was the original way you did the Black Chaos Max lock, but you no longer need to. There are more efficient routes. Moving away from just the rituals, though, there are other things, particularly light fairies, that Drytron has a lot of access to. Vanity's Ruler was the deck's main win condition on launch, before it got things like Mu Beta, and it also was during last summer when it won UK Nationals with just Tribute 7 Vanity's Ruler, make a spell negate, good. Right now, it's probably worth running if you're just learning the deck, because the ability to just make Zeus normal Vanity's Ruler and pass going second is quite useful to have. But as you get better at the deck, you're going to be more consistently OTKing, and you'll still be able to set up the Magician of Black Chaos lock, Max lock more consistently as well, which also going first is a lot better lock, especially in a format where everyone's playing Book of Moon as well. It's still strong, but not where it used to be. Not really worth playing either, unless you're still learning. Lancia is something that I cut from this, which I very rarely do. I actually have it over here somewhere. Oh, yeah. Because it's just always around. Search for off Ben 10, having the ability to stop like Bistials and end phase is really nice. And draw phase, sorry, is really nice. And also it stops things like Dino basically playing at all, because you stop the Misc effect. That said, I played this deck plenty of times last format. It never really felt like it did enough, so I cut it for just more utility. But obviously nice to play, and in some formats it's incredibly warping that you can just search Lancia, and suddenly they can't do anything. After that you have Honest, which is absolutely hilarious. Particularly because you will frequently have access to this guy, who is light, and therefore you can Honest, and can attack multiple times per turn. Again, to all special summon monsters. Mostly it's an out for tower style monsters. You can see I'm not playing anything in the main other than the Kree cards for that. But right now, the main monster that's like that can also be Disruption as well as just sitting there. So you kind of need to out it more directly than summoning a guy and trying to punch with it over. But whenever you make Draconins with it and you have a 6,000 attack monster that can attack 6 times, it can be unbelievably funny. Other than that, though, other areas where you can mix it up in the main deck. You can't play Fenrir or Pank in Drytron because they can be null summoned or set, therefore they get fouled lock. But you do have the alternative of Alpha, the Master of Beasts. Not as powerful as those two, but it's still a pretty good board breaker. You can run over something, bounce it back, special it again as just link material. Preparation of Rites is something that I cut from this that I'm typically playing, and is also in my list of recent cards that I have on the side here. I do typically like Prep because it helps you beat things like Ash on Ben 10 more easily. But again, I made the call that no hand traps, well, or at least fewer hand traps. And yeah, it worked out. I think there's a good case for playing one, just as a thrust target, but I cut it, and even if you're playing one for thrust, you probably don't need to max it out. Finally, in terms of main deck techs, I regularly get asked about the new guy from Dune, the Ursatron Alpha. It's level 7, and it special summon itself if you control a Drytron or an Asarctic apart from itself. Don't play it. It's bad. It's a level 7, so you can't use it for Mu Beta, which makes it a pretty bad extender for Drytron. You can only summon from hand, so it's poor tribute fodder, as opposed to literally any other Drytron. And its search effect is generally only going to be adding Nova, so just play Nova. You saw earlier that when you consider Fafnir as an extra copy of Nova, you're already not maxing out on Nova, so adding even more copies of that means you're likely to get bricked on it. It's just not going to help you. So, extra deck techs. More Nightmares. Obviously right now I'm just playing these two, but back when you're playing the Go Second build, in Poke formats, and then Tactical Masters format after that, you played Cerberus as well to help force out monster interactions. Very nice. It's good. It's good, but wanted space ended up being cut. The other option is Nightmare Griffin, which you can use for the aforementioned turn skip with this. You send Thunder of Ruler with Beatrice, and then you set it back to your field with Nightmare Griffin, which means you skip main phase 1, skip battle phase, which means skip main phase 2, done. However, after Maze of Millennia, we get transaction rollback, which means you no longer need the Griffin, because you can just Beatrice, send the transaction rollback, and activate it that way. Underworld Goddess is another way to out tower-style monsters. But again, Noir is disruption, so there are better ways to do that, I feel. Comes in and out of the list, format to format, and is relatively easy to make because you just kind of spam bodies. But not right now. Similarly, another card that's not right now that I have played is Herald of Mirage Lights. You don't typically have that much interaction with back row going first in this deck, so playing that can let you discard a fairy to negate. However, most of the time you're making Perfection, which is the same but an Omni negate. And I figured Masquerena has more wide application as a link to that is Disruption than Mirage Lights, so that's what I went with. Could easily make a case for either one of them, but I like Masquerena. After that, you have a whole swath of level 7 synchros that you can theoretically make. The idea being is that any name plus Diviner, you send Untis to like pop a back row, pop on a gate, or whatever. That's now level 6, so that makes you straight into a level 7 for Disruption. The main ones people talk about are Dawn Dragster, which has utility burst going first and going second, because it's a spell trap negate. Quibelt, which pops any card. Moonlight Dragon, which is a bounce for a special summon monster. And Black Rose, which is obviously just a field nuke. All of them are interesting ideas and good to resolve when they can. But at the end of the day, most of the time, the fact that it has to specifically be Diviner that has resolved and a single name is just not consistent enough. You get more value from just playing Nightmares. Because you can, yes, you can pop a back row with Quibelt, but you can also do that with Nightmare Phoenix. You can bounce a monster with Moonlight, but you can just pop it with Cerberus or spin it with Unicorn. It's just easier. Okay, so on to combos. Okay, now that that's done, I want to go through a few basic combos to get an idea of how the deck plays and what it's attempting to do when it does. That said, this is a deck where I do not recommend learning combos as rote, but instead developing an understanding of the deck as you go. Obviously this is a good place to start, but with Drytron, lines both diverge and converge easily and frequently, and what you do and which of those lines you take determines what you can play through and around. But to do that, you really need an understanding of the deck from practice, and then you'll get, I guess, an instinctive view of what the best choice is most of the time. That said, start with a basic combo. Alpha versus Zeta, all you need. So start with Alpha effect, tribute Zeta for cost. So on the Alpha, and that lets you add copy of Benten. Then you can Zeta tribute the Benten. That lets you add the ritual spell. And Benten lets you add Choju. Then you can go overlay to make Mu Beta. Mu Beta effect, you can send a copy of Gamma. From here you can activate Mesionis, detach one, do summon back Benten, and then as your fifth summon, Choju. Chainlink 1 Choju, Chainlink 2 Benten. You can add Herald of Perfection, Dawn of the Herald, and Magician of Black Chaos Max. Now obviously this is 5 summons, they can nib here and frequently will. However, if they do that, you have Gamma Engrave that you can just tribute this to add back to hand. You have Mesionis that you can use to ritual summon this, and you can just play through nib. That said, nib plus another hand trap is more of a challenge. This is a nib resilient combo, but you still will sometimes get nibbed. That said, after that, your line will be Dawn of the Herald, tribute the Choju to summon out Herald of Perfection, and then Dawn's effect Engrave lets you add this back to hand. So now you have both, and this is therefore a negate. You can then go Mesionis, target the Mu Beta, turn it back to hand. This thing now has only 1000 attack, and you can Gamma, tribute the Black Chaos Max, send out the Gamma, and a Zeta. Which one you can go? Mesionis, tribute any two, it really doesn't matter which you choose. In this case, the Mu Beta or the material. Summon Black Chaos Max. And here you can then go Link into Dynamondo. And that leaves you with a guaranteed material to negate with perfection. The Dynamondo setup locked and loaded, Black Chaos Max Engrave, and an additional body. You contribute this with Black Chaos Max if you particularly want to, so that they can't do anything in end phase, or you can just leave it there as a guy for follow-up. This is the basic Alpha plus Zeta combo that you'll go for, probably the best one and one you'll be doing the most as well. The next combo to show you is if you open combo plus Benten. This lets you set up Herald of Perfection incredibly early, both before nib and before you commit to either Choju or Mu Beta, which are the closest things you have to a choke point. This obviously makes your combo far more resilient, and 3-card combo, so it's not that common, but you see things this or close enough very frequently. So you can start with Alpha Tribute Zeta, which lets you add Perfection. And then you can Zeta tribute the Benten to this time add Dawn of the Herald. Benten will add another copy of Benten. Then you can activate Dawn, tribute the Benten to summon Perfection, at which point you can go Benten effect Chainlink 1, Dawn effect Chainlink 2, target the Benten. This returns to hand, and you search a copy of Choju. Then you can overlay to make Mu Beta. Mu Beta effect to dump a copy of Delta. could be Gamma, really doesn't matter. Delta effect, tribute the Benten to summon itself. Now, if you had any other monster ritual spell in hand, you could draw a card here, but the basic one you don't, you just summon the Delta. Benten effect, that's another Benten. Then you can tribute summon your Choju to add Meteonis and a Black Chaos Max. After that, it's pretty simple. Meteonis, you can attach the 2 material to summon the Black Chaos Max. You can Meteonis target the Rubeta to add it back to hand. And then you can take these 2 into a copy of Dynamondo. And because you've gone through a lot of Bentens and this is on field, you can Dynamondo effect to shuffle back the Rubeta and a copy of Benten. So that means not only do you have an additional Benten in circulation effectively, because you shuffle one back, you also have one in hand that you contribute follow-up, as well as a copy of Meteonis, so you can ritual summon twice on follow-up there as well as it also being another guaranteed negate for the Herald of Perfection. Obviously, if you have more fairies, you get more negates. The last combo I want to show is what happens when you only open one name. In this case, Zeta, can be Alpha, can be Delta if you also open Way to the Ritual Spell or to a second Benten as well. That said, the basic combo is weaker because you can't typically end on Herald of Perfection, but you still get to do the Chaos Max lock if you go interrupted. This combo is definitely worse, but it's what you do when you only open one name. So if you go Zeta, tribute the Benten, you can add the Meteonis. Benten effect will add you a Diviner, because it's like Fairy. You can normal summon the Diviner, use its effect. Dump Arclight. This is why you have to play Diviner, particularly in the main deck, because it just unbreaks you like this quite frequently. Arclight's effect then adds you a second copy of Benten. You can activate Meteonis, tribute the Zeta, to summon back a copy of Benten, and because of Diviner's effect, this is now level 6. Therefore, you can make your Beatrice. Go Beatrice, dump Gamma, and therefore when you use Gamma's effect, tributing the Benten, you summon back the Zeta, and that's how you can still make Mubeta. But first you use Benten to just grab another Benten and overlay. Then Mubeta will send a copy of Alpha. Alpha will tribute the Benten to summon itself, which will add the Black Chaos Max. And the Benten, because you're now out of Bentens, you can just add Natasha. It doesn't really matter what you add, but I'm using Natasha just because it's a ritual you contribute that searches off the Benten. Then you can Meteonis effect, target either one of these, it doesn't matter which you use, to add it to hand. You can activate it, use both these 2 materials, and summon out the Black Chaos Max. Then if you're worried about Nib, you can tribute off the Alpha and just go straight into the Mubeta, into the Dynamondo. Or more likely what you'll do is you'll link these 2 away to make your Dynamondo, shuffle back your Mubeta, and one of your copies of Benten, because it's useful to have them in deck for the grind. Obviously you don't have any copies of any guaranteed negates here, but you can still do the Dynamondo lock, and you have guaranteed follow-up because you have Alpha Natasha. You can also, if you want, bounce back the Beatrice, but that's no pressure to. Instead, more likely that this is going to come in handy in follow-up. If you're playing any useful techs against decks where you can send off Beatrice, you can obviously just go and draw phase to play around talents, Obviously you can't play around thrust, but you can still use the Beatrice send effects just on the opponent's turn. So, with that all said, I think that is the conclusion of Drytron that I wanted to go through now. So what do I expect from the deck going forwards? Well, in January with Maze of Millennia, we're getting the new Arcana Force card, called the Fiend, which by searching the Arcana Force field spell means you can do a true turn skip with the world consistently, i.e. they don't even get draw, standby, etc. They can't draw the out in their only phase. Even then, however, the Chaos Max lock will probably still remain stronger than that, because a bit more resilient to hand traps. If you get impermed on the world, suddenly you don't really have anything left. That said, this is definitely the most favourable metagame for Drytron, since Darkwing Blast released the Magnum and the other Bestials nearly a year ago now. Up until now, it's had a real struggle with that because the Shufflers in tier just was not good for the deck at all. Bestial's really bad as well, and Arise Heart was so much of a problem, it was probably a 95-5 matchup against Kashtira. That said, people like Yordi Wang have proven that you can do well with the deck if you get a bit lucky and you play well. And I expect this to at least be around and something you have to be aware of, even if it isn't likely to be meta in the upcoming format. It still has problems as a deck, like if Droll's still going to be in the side, it's still not great against that, even if you can play around it sometimes. But you should at least consider Drytron if you're interested in playing it, and you should at least be aware of it when you're building your deck. Hope you've enjoyed everything I had to say.